Good evening. It's 10 p.m. Under orders from the United States Supreme Court, the Federal Communications Commission has decided that after 10 p.m. every night, if you don't like what you're hearing on the radio, you can change the fucking station. This is the Late Night Law Review with Skyler C. and special guest host tonight.
And most nights, Old Man Miles here. What's up, guys?
Hey, yeah, so we're living large tonight.
Here we are.
Enjoying another beautiful autumn day here in sunny Flagstaff, Arizona.
It's getting cold, man.
Oh,
it's
loving
awesome.
It. I wore a sweater today.
I know. I broke up the jacket today, man.
Yeah,
it's fantastic. We got a nice weather coming in. We got our excellent setup here with the video and the camera and the phone and the, I'm stoked.
Yeah, it's going to be a great show tonight. We're going to be spending a good chunk of the evening talking about the wacky Supreme Court nonsense that happened over the summer.
Oh, shit, the Supreme Court says.
Yeah, the Supreme Court are definitely taking it to another level this year. Other than that, we've got a little bit of sort of finishing up on our previous discussion about copyrights and plagiarism, which we sort of touched on at the end of last week, but didn't really get into a whole lot. But yeah, so I was thinking we might just jump right into the Supreme Court, considering it's a really big deal.
All right, let's do it.
So this year, was it June 21st?
Yeah, definitely over the summer, for sure.
Of this year, the Supreme Court decided that the landmark 1965 Voting Rights Act that was signed in by President Lyndon Johnson and a majority of Congress and the Senate. It happened right after the Civil Rights Act, but this was actually explicitly protecting people's right to vote. Apparently the Supreme Court decided this year that the Voting Rights Act no longer applies. And
because there are no racists anymore?
That was their argument. So the way to get more specific into like legal analysis here, because that's kind of what my main focus in life is right now, is looking at laws and what they really mean, is so the Voting Rights Act 1965 had three parts to it. There was one part that was a formula to decide whether or not an area of the country that is responsible for elections or voting at large, whether this specific area of the country has created impediments to people being able to vote, specifically discriminating against people based on race, membership in a language minority group, or color.
Right. To no one's surprise, a lot of these states ended up being in the South.
Yes, but not exclusively in the South.
No, certainly, but yeah.
Just to point that out, there was like a couple of counties in Connecticut. And so it was a big deal. Pretty much the formula that they used was, has this area used some sort of test or some sort of extraneous matter that limits people's ability to vote, and in the last 10 years. And if they have, that's like one part of the test. The other part of the test is whether or not African Americans or people of color, 50% of them are registered to vote, or 50% of them actually voted in the last election, the 1964 presidential election.
Right.
And so if half of the voting age residents didn't register or vote, or half of them didn't register, or half of those that didn't vote, then the federal government was accepting the possibility that there was action by that area, that jurisdiction, saying, like, specifically limiting people's ability to vote. And if you met these two criteria, your area, and there were, I believe, 12 states and a whole bunch of counties independent of the states that all fit under these criteria. And so using these criteria as a way of judging whether people are being discriminated against, the law went on to establish two sort of policies. One was federal agents would go into voting areas to register people, federal people, that is, not locals, not the local member of the KKK telling black people that they should register with him.
If you met the qualifications for one of these states or counties, then the feds would come in and register people to vote.
Right. And so after the passage of the law in 1965, some crazy number, 250,000 African Americans registered by the end of the year. The law came into effect on August 6th. by December 31st, 250,000 new registrants.
Wow.
1/3 of those were registered specifically by the federal people, because they were unbiased. They were outsiders who just were there to make sure people could vote.
Sure.
So there was this like strong push to make sure that there was a sort of objective voting process. People there making sure that people were able to access voting on the day of elections. There were these federal people there whose job it was to make sure no one was being discriminated against. The other part of the law, the third part, is that there is a system called pre-clearance, where either the Attorney General or a 3-judge panel from the District Court of District of Columbia would have to approve any changes to voter registration rules from these areas that qualify.
Okay.
So if you are a traditionally racist piece of shit asshole county, if you want to like restructure the way you vote, you have to run it by the Attorney General before you can change the way people vote.
Makes sense.
And so there were 2 additional things that were written in the first 1965 bill. The federal agents had a 5-year time limit. After 5 years, they're done. Additionally, and that got sort of reestablished 5 years later in 1970, and for 10 years, and then again in 1980 for another 25 years, because every time they reviewed it, they saw that there were still problems. So there were 2 other little parts of the law in the 1965 and all of the later additions to it, specifically that some states, upon review, that didn't qualify in 1965, some jurisdictions did qualify later. So in 1970, a couple of counties got added because after the Voting Rights Act was passed, they implemented things that were against the Voting Rights Act. And so they got added to this list. That was called bailing in, where if you fuck up and have discriminatory processes, you can have this law applied to you because you're a racist asshole.
Right.
And so that was one part of it, bailing in. Another part of it was bailing out, where if you prove that since the law came into effect, you haven't actually done any of these things anymore. You fixed everything. You're completely non-discriminatory. You're operating above ground in every way. Initially it was 5 years in a row. If you're totally clean for 5 years, you can ask the District Court of D.C. to take away your pre-clearance requirements and to take away the federal watchers.
So it's like parole, basically.
Yeah, basically, you guys fucked up, so we're going to have some people there watching you, and
if you do good,
and you can prove that you did good,
we will unfuck you.
Right. And it's not like they were doing anything particularly like violent to these states or counties. They weren't like robbing them or taking like 1/3 of their income. They were having federal monitors watch them run elections. That was it. And so I guess like states' rights advocates think that this is like a huge abridgment of like their rights to run their elections, but it could just as easily be seen as a way of the federal government recognizing that some people aren't following federal law and implementing a policy that will keep that federal law being followed. And this is like pretty fundamental to the whole like mythology of the United States, that if you can't, the reason why we're so great and democracy wins over communism is because we vote, right? We all have a say, quote unquote.
Yeah, rule by and for the people, baby.
And while I don't buy any of that, and I think
nor do I
think there are a lot of problems with the whole voting process that we have today. That's sort of our mythology, and so having these states be so incredibly pissed off that the federal government is forcing them to follow that mythology is, to me, kind of ironic. And so...
What do you mean we have to follow what the Constitution says? What do you mean we have to agree to the ideological principle of democracy? That's not fair.
Yeah, not fair at all. I mean, particularly after 1965, when...
Man, yeah. I mean,
1964, when it became established that, black people are people.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that was when the whole Civil Rights Act, of course, was going all over the place, and going, some really great places. And at the time, and for rightly so, it was agreed that there needed to be checks on the negative political actions of people when it comes to gerrymandering, when it comes to whatever means they can come up with to prohibit people whose skin color they don't like from voting. So because they weren't following the rules of their own accord, we had to have an institution in place to make them follow the rules.
Right, which actually, I mean, like with those numbers, in the first 6 months, they had 250,000 African Americans registered.
I mean, that's insane.
I mean, that's the state of voting 1964.
Right.
By 1965, it was much better. By the end of 1966, the majority of blacks were registered to vote in all but 4 states. So black people registered a lot.
Right.
Within the next 18 months, all but 4 states had a majority.
Mm-hmm.
And so this law was pretty effective. And like I said, so the special provisions of the federal people going in and watching, those requirements were set to expire at regular intervals, first 5 and then 10 years. And every time Congress sat down and talked about it, they realized that enough hadn't been done, that the situation was still messed up. As recently as the 90s, 96 was the last time they did it. It's been an ongoing thing, and the law has changed to include specific wording on minority language groups. Mm-hmm. That is, if a significant number of the population in an area speaks a language, then they have to have access to either ballots in that language or a translator at every voting place where they are a significant minority.
Right.
I want to say it's 20%.
Because despite the efforts of some, English is not the official language of the United States of America.
And never will be,
right.
And I think definitely should never be. Pretty much who makes that anyone who I hear making that argument, whether they know it or not, is a fucking racist.
Right.
And that's just the end of it. They're specifically stating that the country they want to live in is one that doesn't contain people of certain ethnic origins, and that they should be surrounded by people of the right type, and should not be forced to endure people of the wrong type.
Yeah, you can't go forcing other cultures on us. That's rude.
And I think that anybody who makes that argument of a single language or the language of this country is, whether they know it or not, being very fucking racist.
I agree.
And so that's where things were up until June of this year, and a lot of people have made an attempt. A lot of sort of extremely conservative, let's just say racist people, have been trying to get some sort of action. They've been trying to get it through to the Supreme Court to say that that these sort of restrictions are unconstitutional. Roberts wrote the majority opinion. It was 2006 was the last time they renewed it.
Okay.
Now that I look at it, so it's not like Congress had just written this law in 1964 and it was just still on the books. They reviewed it every 5 or 10 years since then, as recently as 2006, deciding that this is a law that we should keep. And that's Congress deciding that this is a law we should keep over and over and over again. But Chief Justice Roberts, with the majority, decided that this summer that the act was unconstitutional because it overstepped the bounds of federalism. The argument was that the federal government has to treat all states equally. And because the federal government was singling out certain states and certain jurisdictions, they were talking specifically about states that if Arizona and Texas and a handful of other states are being singled out, then that's not fair. If some states are going to have to ask the Attorney General before they can change their voter registration laws, every state should have to ask the Attorney General before. Right. Which I think is total bullshit.
It is. I mean, it's completely contrary. There's a reason that we have, like I said, these institutions. It's on this issue. All states are not equal. All counties are not equal, and there needs to be some sort of enforcement of democratic principles if we're going to at least pretend that we still live in a democracy.
Yeah, I mean, It's totally ludicrous. I mean, this was a sort of the overarching sort of thing. There were more specific, like, legal arguments. But this is just the idea. Like, the fact is that some states are different. Like, some states do need to be reprimanded or forced to follow federal laws that they refuse to follow.
Right.
Like, that seems to be, like, a sensical thing and well within the rights of Congress to decide.
It seems to me that if you're, either on the personal level or the legislative level or whatever, if you're not following federal law, now I'm not saying federal law is by any means always just or anything like that, but if you, theoretically speaking, if you have federal law, then you should enforce federal law. So, I mean, does that make sense, right?
And I would imagine the highest court in the land, the court that determines the federal law applicability to situations,
who interprets it,
would. I mean, interpretation is arguably a recent addition to their powers.
Okay.
But even so, like, their role is to look at federal law and see that it's being implemented. Like, that's their job, is to make sure that federal laws are being handled properly. And this is a pretty specific case of, like, this is a federal law that people weren't handling, and the federal lawmakers put in a way of dealing with people who weren't following the law. In the law. Like, the law said, if you don't do this, then this will happen. And the people who didn't do that had that happen. Like that's what it's just.
This is not a matter of discrimination against certain areas of the country. It's a matter of, you have a history, you have a record of not doing what we've asked you to do, which is why we have this law in place to make sure that you do it. I think that, now, I don't know how you feel about this, but these days, like this most recent occurrence, right? I think that the reason the people, on the right who have been pushing for, who pushed for this and who really tried to make this a big issue, I mean, we call them fucking racists, and that's fine, they're fucking racists. But I really do think that for a lot of them, maybe even most of them, it's not a matter of we hate black people or minorities. It's a matter of black people and minorities tend to vote Democrat. And
right.
We've been seeing that a lot in recent elections.
There's certainly a big part of it, a very strong push to sort of keep people who vote in certain ways out of the polling place.
Right.
And that's an ongoing issue, and it's getting worse, obviously, with the Supreme Court as one example, deciding that these 40-year-old facts, and this is sort of paraphrasing from Chief Justice Roberts. He wrote the majority opinion,
sure.
so like the legal record of what the court decided was what
was the vote?
It was like
5-4.
5-4.
Yeah, I believe it was 5-4.
Pretty certain it was 5-4.
Yeah, that's the way these days. That's the way the Supreme Court works. It's like, everybody votes one way like they're expected to, everybody votes another way like they're expected to, and then what do you think, Anthony Kennedy?
I mean, in any case, there's a pretty good conception of who the 2 or 3 on each side are going to be.
Yeah.
And then there's the 1 or 2 sort of.
Usually Anthony Kennedy.
And I hesitated to. I had to think about it for a minute because there were 5-4, but Thomas, everybody's favorite.
Oh, Clarence Thomas, sure.
Decided to write another opinion in support, like he voted
like a concurrent,
a concurrent opinion, stating that. So the official opinion was that the technique they used for determining whether or not a state, the formula, did 50% of people vote, and did you discriminate since this law was written, or have you discriminated in the last 10 years? That formula.
Were you racist last week? Did you try to be racist last week? Sorry, go ahead.
I mean, their sort of argument was that formula, 40 years old, just has no bearing on today's reality. And that if they're going to implement the Voting Rights Act, if they're going to institute it on the states, if they're going to give some states preferential treatment, they need to come up with a new way of determining which states need to be treated in what way. And so the formula was shot down.
Yeah.
Clarence Thomas, which being the like token black guy, seems odd. But he struck down not only that part, but also all of the repercussions. Not only should we not use this old formula to decide what states are or are not being racist in their voting rights, but also we shouldn't punish states that are being racist in their voting policies.
Well, okay, it's weird because so he added that as part of his concurrent opinion, right?
Right.
But now it's not like the Supreme Court says it, and yay, it is written, right? I mean, now you have to see how lower courts are going to interpret it, because correct me if I'm wrong. You're more of a legal scholar than I am, certainly, but I've read about cases where it's like, okay, so the majority opinion was this, but the other 4 people wrote this dissenting opinion, and then one of the guys on the majority wrote a concurrent opinion that actually seems more like the dissenters, so the lower courts decide to rule more in favor with what the dissenting opinion says.
Yeah, I mean, that sort of thing happens. I mean, it's all recorded as official, as the official decision of the Supreme Court, whether it's the, all they're deciding that specific case. What the opinions, what the written sort of documentation is designed to do is to let other judges and other lawyers know why they thought the way they did.
Right.
And so it's not like Justice Roberts' statement that it's a 40-year-old fact that has no relationship to modern reality. What they decided was that in this case the defendant was wrong. It just so happens that the reason they decided that in this case the defendant was wrong is because they think that the formula used to decide is out of date.
Right, but next thing you know, something's going to happen, and some lawsuit's going to come up, before a federal court of appeals or something like that, and somebody's going to look at Thomas's concurring opinion and be like, oh, hey, look at that. Supreme Court says he wrote for the majority. I mean, yeah, it's just him, but Supreme Court says that it's okay to be racist.
Well, I mean, that's certainly something the Supreme Court said this summer. Like, that's something that I feel the Supreme Court was definitely leaning towards, the idea that if you run the county board of elections, if everybody on the county board of elections wants to do some shit so that certain people can't vote, then they can do that shit. Like, that's what the Supreme Court effectively said. I mean, you can still appeal it after the fact, but you can't have the federal government in there before the fact.
What they actually said, though, which is almost more disturbing to me, is that, at least, Roberts and the majority, what they essentially said, if I've heard you right, is not that it's okay for states and counties to do this, but states and counties aren't going to do this. We don't live in that world anymore.
Right.
These rules no longer apply, so we don't have to worry. This doesn't have to be law anymore because nobody's going to do it.
Yeah, they go on and on, like for several paragraphs about how much good the Voting Rights Act has done.
Right.
And that gets me to the dissenting opinion.
Oh, yes. Ginsburg!
Yeah, Justice Ginsburg, exact quote, throwing out the Voting Rights Act when it has worked and is continuing to work to stop discriminatory changes is like throwing away your umbrella in a rainstorm because you're not getting wet. and that's it. Like we live in a world where the things that caused the Voting Rights Act to be passed aren't happening so much anymore.
Right.
Because the Voting Rights Act is there stopping it from happening.
Can I just say how much I love Ruth Bader Ginsburg? Like, seriously, she is a badass. She is a fucking badass, and she has been a fucking Supreme Court badass for a very long time.
Yeah, I mean, I've certainly had some issues with some of the things that she's said and done, but by and large, yeah, I think of all the folks, of all the old people sitting on that court, she's definitely the old...
She's one of the coolest old white people.
Old, wealthy, powerful, politically connected people that I've seen in a while.
I mean, in that particular demographic, you take them where you can find them, right?
Yeah.
You take your friends where they come. It's like, wow, you actually have power, and you see things my way. That's really awesome. Thank you. So when you get a chance to Google her just whole opinion.
Yeah, it was great.
It's so awesome.
It was so good. She was really like right on, and she was pretty irate that like
she was pissed
that this was a thing that her like fellow judges could do.
Yeah.
Like she was not anywhere close. She was not happy.
Yeah. So thanks, Supreme Court.
So yeah, they threw away the umbrella because they weren't getting wet, and now so within a couple of hours, I think 7 formerly racist states announced that they were
no longer racist.
But no longer racist.
Yeah.
That they were going to implement policies that the Attorney General had declined. Things that they wanted to do, but the Attorney General said, you know what, you have a history of racism. If you implement these, you might not implement them in a fair way. They're implementing those.
Yeah.
And also fairly shortly thereafter, the Attorney General moved to get several states, Texas was the first, back under supervision, because I don't know if you remember way back when I was talking about the other parts of the bill, that there's an option to get bailed in.
Yeah,
or if you do these things that are illegal, that are discriminatory, after the law passes, you can get
you still fall under the purview of the
it.
law if the criteria apply to you.
Right. Just so the Supreme Court struck down the formula that was used to put states and jurisdictions on it previously, but the Attorney General still has the power to add states if they do wrong.
Right.
And so he immediately moved. He literally days later, Texas, you're in.
You're in. Congratulations.
And so that was. I mean, who's to say? I mean, the next election, I don't see any real. Okay, so we're a ways out, and I hate being that asshole that's talking about the next election.
The 2016
election.
But
I don't see a whole lot of options for the Republicans to really get a large-scale support of a majority of Americans without doing some really fucked up shit. Indications that might happen have been building over every election I've been keeping track of, and getting worse.
Well, I mean, they've been doing fucked up shit since 2000 at the latest.
Well, I mean, Voting Rights Act, obviously, they've been doing it since the 1960s.
Well, no, sure, but I mean...
1860s. They've been doing it since the 1860s. No, 1770s. They've been doing fucked up shit since the 1790s, maybe? But, definitely...
1774-ish?
Somewhere in there,
yeah.
But in my lifetime, it's been progressively getting worse.
Right.
The 2012 had a lot of crazy shit going down.
Yes, it did. A lot of good things, too. I mean, a lot of at least more positive things. More women in the Senate than ever before. A lot of these big money, Sheldon Adelson-backed candidates didn't win. But, certainly a lot of
underhanded tricks.
Yeah.
Calling, 40,000 Latino people in the state of Florida, calling 30,000 of them saying, hey, you can't vote because your name matches a name on the database because their last name is Lopez.
Right. I mean, how many stories did we hear going into that election
that was crazy.
Yeah.
Ongoing, just calling people for no reason, sending people letters saying that they couldn't vote, who had the entire right to vote, but they had a common last name that was also a Latino-sounding last name.
And I mean, there were so many campaigns, eliminating mail-in ballots, eliminating early voting, all this stuff from these same states.
Yeah.
These are the people that are doing it. It's North Carolina, it's Florida, it's all these, the places that are that were targeted by the Voting Rights Act, and rightly so. These are the people that are oh no, voting, no, you can't vote. No, God, no, you're not white.
Yeah, I mean, that's what, it's effectively what a lot of these states have been trying to say, and now that the Voting Rights Act is pretty much out, there's a lot more room for states to do some really fucked up shit in this next big election.
Yeah.
And that definitely.
Man.
Yeah, that's really
who are they
kind of terrifying.
Who are they gonna run though?
Yeah, that's the thing. Is I don't see, even with all this shit. I mean, okay, for one, just to set the record straight, the Democrats and Republicans work for the same people. Yeah. They have the same overarching agenda.
They are effectively the same party.